Hello, I'm Phantom Mitchell, and in today's true crime documentary, we delve into one of the most shocking and controversial cases in modern history, the story of Lorena Bobbitt. In 1993, Lorena took an unimaginable step that would change the course of her life forever. What led her to sever her husband's genitals in a brutal act of revenge? Was it an act of desperate survival, or something darker? Join me as we explore the shocking twists of this real-life crime, the impact it had on those involved, and the haunting aftermath. Stay tuned to find out the truth behind this bizarre and tragic case. Lorena Bobbitt was just a 24-year-old immigrant when she met John Bobbitt, a man whose charm quickly led them into marriage. But behind the fairy tale facade, the relationship soon spiraled into a nightmare. From the outside, they seemed like any other couple, but in private, Lorena endured years of physical, emotional, and sexual abuse. John was a manipulative man, using his power over Lorena to control her every move. Yet, despite the escalating violence, Lorena stayed, convinced she had nowhere to turn. Little did she know that the night of June 23, 1993, would change everything. The abuse was not only physical, it was psychological. John would belittle Lorena, mock her accent, and insult her heritage, making her feel small and powerless. But the worst of it came behind closed doors. John's violent rages had become a constant threat to Lorena's safety. She knew she had to escape, but she couldn't see a way out. One fateful night, the violence escalated again. John had been drinking, and after another brutal altercation, Lorena was pushed to her breaking point. Desperation and fear led her to take a horrifying step that no one could have predicted. It happened in a split second. John had fallen asleep after another night of tormenting her, and Lorena seized the moment. With a calmness that shocked even herself, she grabbed a kitchen knife. What happened next was both horrific and surreal. In one swift motion, she severed John's genitals, a crime so bizarre it would soon become a part of American criminal folklore. In a daze, Lorena fled the house, leaving the mutilated body of her husband behind. The shock of her actions sent ripples through the neighborhood as people struggled to comprehend what had just occurred. The police arrived at the scene within minutes of the 911 call, but the real chaos was just beginning. John Bobbitt, bloodied and in shock, was rushed to the hospital in critical condition. His injuries were severe, but doctors managed to save him after hours of surgery. Meanwhile, Lorena's whereabouts were unknown, and the world was left in suspense. What had driven this woman to commit such an unthinkable act? Was she a victim of abuse pushed too far, or was there something darker at play? The media frenzy began, and questions about Lorena's sanity and motives would dominate headlines. The story took an even stranger turn when Lorena was eventually found and arrested. Her actions had shocked the nation, and now she was facing serious charges. But what really happened that night? Was this a crime of passion, or was it a cold, calculated act? Lorena's defense attorney argued that she was suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder (PTSD), the result of years of abuse. They painted her as a woman pushed beyond her limits, a victim who had no other choice but to fight back. But many still saw her actions as extreme, unforgivable. Even the media circus surrounding her arrest only added to the growing intrigue. John Bobbitt, meanwhile, became an overnight sensation. As he recovered in the hospital, he appeared on television interviews, portraying himself as a victim of his wife's insanity. The public, however, was divided. Some sympathized with John, but many began to see him as an arrogant, abusive man who had manipulated and controlled his wife for years. His recovery, though physically successful, did nothing to restore his reputation. In fact, the more he spoke out, the more his behavior seemed to confirm the abuse allegations. But his public appearances were only the beginning of a story that would continue to unfold in shocking ways. As Lorena's trial approached, the public's fascination with the case reached a fever pitch. The courtroom became a battleground for control of the narrative. On one side, Lorena's defense team worked tirelessly to show the extent of the abuse she had suffered. They argued that her violent reaction was the result of years of torment, emotional, physical, and sexual, that had taken a profound toll on her mental health. On the other side, the prosecution painted Lorena as a woman who had gone too far, whose actions could not be justified under any circumstances. As the trial played out, both sides presented compelling arguments, but the outcome seemed uncertain. Throughout the trial, Lorena's defense team put forward a compelling case. They called witnesses who testified to the abuse Lorena had endured, friends, family members, even a therapist who had seen the psychological scars left by John's cruelty. The image of Lorena as a terrified woman, pushed to the brink of insanity, started to take hold, but the prosecution didn't back down. They painted her as a woman who, regardless of her past trauma, had committed an unforgivable act. No matter how sympathetic Lorena's story seemed, the brutality of what she had done could not be overlooked. In an unexpected turn, Lorena took the stand herself. Her testimony was raw, emotional, and heart-wrenching. She described the years of physical and sexual abuse she had endured at the hands of her husband. Her voice trembled as she spoke about the emotional scars that had been left on her. For the first time, the jury and the world heard directly from Lorena about the pain she had been living with for so long. Her words resonated with many, and the courtroom fell into a stunned silence. But despite her emotional plea, the legal battle was far from over. When the jury finally returned with their verdict, the courtroom was filled with anticipation. The question on everyone's mind: would Lorena Bobbitt be found guilty of a brutal crime, or would the years of abuse she had suffered be enough to justify her actions? In a surprising twist, Lorena was acquitted of the most serious charges, but she was found guilty of unlawful wounding. The verdict sent shockwaves through the public. While Lorena avoided a lengthy prison sentence, the jury's decision left many questions unanswered. Was she justified in her actions, or had she crossed a line that could never be forgiven? Despite the outcome of the trial, Lorena Bobbitt's life was far from normal. The media continued to sensationalize her actions, casting her as either a tragic figure or a villain, depending on the perspective. Yet, Lorena refused to remain a passive participant in her own story. After her release, she shifted her focus towards advocating for other survivors of domestic violence, speaking out about the trauma she endured. She knew that despite the judgment she faced, her story had the potential to inspire and shed light on the plight of those suffering in silence. Her transformation from a woman who had been silenced by abuse to a voice for the voiceless was nothing short of remarkable. The media storm surrounding Lorena Bobbitt's case was relentless. For years after the trial, she remained a constant fixture in tabloid headlines, dissected and discussed by pundits and the public alike. But beneath the controversy, Lorena struggled to rebuild her life. She was often haunted by the fear that her past would never be left behind. Her attempt to live a quiet life was shattered when her personal history was constantly dragged back into the public eye. She learned firsthand how difficult it can be to escape the shadow of an infamous past, even if the person in question was a victim of abuse. Lorena's life took another turn in 2007 when John Bobbitt was arrested on charges unrelated to their marriage. The once celebrated figure, who had capitalized on his newfound fame by appearing in adult films, was now caught up in a different scandal. He was charged with spousal abuse, a charge that many people found fitting, given the revelations about his treatment of Lorena. But the arrest brought a sense of irony. John had spent years trying to portray himself as the victim, only for his own past actions to catch up with him. This news reignited public debates about the nature of their marriage and who the true victim had been all along. As John Bobbitt's legal troubles mounted, Lorena found herself thrust back into the public spotlight. In interviews, She spoke candidly about the abuse she had endured and how it had shaped her life. For the first time, she was able to address the broader implications of domestic violence, not just her own actions, but the systemic failures that allow abusers to thrive. She had become an unlikely advocate for abuse survivors, using her painful history as a platform for change. The more she spoke, the more her narrative shifted from the woman who had been judged for her actions to a powerful voice for justice. The revelation of John's further abuses only further solidified the public's view of Lorena as the true victim. As he faced legal consequences for his violent behavior, the public began to reevaluate their perceptions of Lorena. She was no longer simply the woman who had committed a shocking act of revenge. She was a survivor of prolonged torment. With this new perspective, Lorena's story became one of strength, resilience, and ultimately redemption. Her journey was a testament to the devastating impact of abuse and the difficulty of finding a way out when trapped in an abusive relationship. Lorena Bobbitt's story continued to evolve as she became involved in various advocacy projects for victims of domestic violence. She used her newfound platform to help women who had experienced similar horrors, emphasizing that no one should ever feel trapped in an abusive relationship. Through her charity work and public speaking engagements, Lorena transformed her pain into purpose. Her voice resonated with countless others who had been silenced by abuse, and her efforts were widely recognized, even as her past continued to haunt her in the media. By 2014, Lorena's life was at a much different stage. She had remarried, started a family, and appeared to have moved on from the infamous crime that had once defined her. Yet, in a deeply personal and vulnerable moment, Lorena agreed to participate in a documentary about her life. This was her opportunity to reclaim her narrative and speak about the painful experiences she had kept private for so long. The documentary allowed Lorena to connect with her audience on a deeper level, revealing the trauma and emotional scars she had lived with since that fateful night. It was a way for her to finally tell her side of the story without the sensationalism that had surrounded it for decades. The release of the documentary marked a turning point in Lorena's public image. The film portrayed her not just as a woman who had committed an extreme act, but as a person who had survived years of cruelty and abuse. Audiences were shocked by the rawness of her testimony, and many who had previously judged her began to see her in a new light. The documentary sparked important conversations about the cycles of abuse that many victims face, and how society often fails to recognize the warning signs until it's too late. For Lorena, it was a chance to educate and advocate for change in the way we view domestic violence. Following the success of the documentary, Lorena's reputation began to shift. She became a sought-after speaker, sharing her story with audiences across the country and raising awareness about the impact of domestic violence. Her transformation from a vilified figure to an advocate for change was remarkable. She used her painful past to help others, and in doing so, found healing for herself. Lorena's efforts were not just about redemption. They were about empowering other survivors to speak out and take control of their own lives, free from the chains of abuse. But even as Lorena found peace in her work and family life, her past continued to linger. There were always those who would never forgive her for her actions, and they were vocal in their criticism. It was a reminder that in the court of public opinion, some people's judgments are impossible to escape. Yet, for Lorena, it no longer mattered. She had come to terms with the fact that she could never fully erase the past, but she could choose how to live in the present. And in the end, it was the present that mattered most, both for her and for the countless others whose lives she had touched through her advocacy. As we look back on the Lorena Bobbitt case, we see more than just a moment of shocking violence. We see a woman who endured unimaginable pain and fought for her survival in ways that no one could have predicted. Lorena's story is not just one of revenge, but of resilience, transformation, and ultimately, healing. It's a reminder that the effects of domestic abuse are far-reaching, and sometimes, The only way out is to fight back, even in ways that the world might never understand. Lorena Bobbitt's legacy, a powerful testament to the strength of the human spirit. As time passed, Lorena Bobbitt's case began to fade from the media spotlight. However, the lasting impact of the events that transpired in 1993 continued to resonate in ways no one had expected. In 2019, the story took another turn when the #MeToo movement reached its peak, sparking a national conversation about the treatment of women and the prevalence of domestic violence. For the first time, many of the same people who had once criticized Lorena began to understand the context of her actions. They saw her not as a criminal, but as a survivor of a deeply entrenched cycle of abuse, and her story was now part of a much larger societal reckoning. Lorena, however, never sought the spotlight again, though the world around her had changed. She had moved on, focusing on her work with domestic violence survivors. Yet, despite her growing advocacy efforts, the public's view of her was still clouded by her infamous past. She continued to live in relative anonymity, knowing that she had done what she could to make a difference, even if the world still saw her through the lens of one tragic moment. In interviews, she often stated that she didn't regret what had happened because it had ultimately allowed her to find a voice for others who were suffering in silence. The years of turmoil had made Lorena a reluctant figure in a conversation she never intended to start. Yet, in 2021, a series of documentaries and articles revisited her story, asking whether she had been unfairly vilified. These retrospectives highlighted the importance of understanding Lorena's actions in the context of her abuse, rather than simply condemning her for what she had done. The conversation had shifted. No longer was she viewed as merely the woman who castrated her husband, but as a powerful example of the destructive consequences of unchecked domestic violence. Lorena had become a symbol, not of vengeance, but of survival. In 2021, Lorena Bobbitt participated in another high-profile interview where she directly addressed the long-lasting trauma from that day in 1993. She spoke candidly about the guilt and shame she had carried for years, but also about the empowering realization that she had done what she thought was necessary to survive. For Lorena, there was no clear-cut answer to her actions, but there was clarity in knowing that what she had endured had pushed her to the edge and that her response, as shocking as it had been, was a desperate cry for help. This interview further shifted public opinion, as many listeners began to reflect on the deeper issues surrounding abuse. John Bobbitt, for his part, continued to try and capitalize on his infamy. In 2007, after his arrest, he attempted to revamp his life and career with a string of reality TV appearances. Yet, his actions both during his marriage and after the violent incident kept him from ever fully escaping the shadow of his own behavior. His controversial past and arrests continued to resurface, reminding the world of the violence that had marked his relationship with Lorena. While Lorena was building a new life and career, John seemed to be forever tied to a past filled with bad decisions and moral ambiguity. As Lorena Bobbitt's story continued to unfold, her role as a victim advocate grew stronger. She began to work closely with organizations dedicated to the prevention of domestic violence, providing support for women who were in situations similar to hers. Her involvement became increasingly focused on mental health support for survivors, and she shared her personal experiences with therapy, recovery, and self-care. By taking an active role in her own healing, Lorena set a powerful example for those who had been victimized, showing that recovery is possible, no matter the odds. While Lorena's advocacy work was making a meaningful impact, the stigma surrounding her actions remained an ongoing challenge. In 2023, she participated in a global conference on domestic violence awareness, where she spoke to a room full of survivors, law enforcement officials, and activists. Her message was simple but profound. Domestic violence affects everyone, and the solution is not always black and white. Lorena's words resonated with many in the room, as they saw her not as a criminal, but as someone who had been pushed into a corner with no escape. The acceptance of her role in this important conversation marked the culmination of years of work to reshape her public identity. As we look back on the case of Lorena Bobbitt, we realize that it is more than just a story of violence and revenge. It's a cautionary tale about the dangers of ignoring the signs of domestic abuse. Lorena's story forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about the nature of power, control, and victimization in relationships. Her actions, though extreme, were the result of a broken system that failed her at every turn. As society continues to evolve, Lorena's journey stands as a reminder that every survivor has a unique story, and they deserve to be heard and supported, not vilified or dismissed. Today, Lorena Bobbitt lives a life far removed from the headlines that once defined her. She has built a new identity based on the values of empathy, resilience, and advocacy. Although her past will always be a part of her, she has found peace in knowing that she has used her painful experiences to help others. Lorena Bobbitt's legacy is not about the violence of that fateful night in 1993, but about her strength to survive, her courage to speak out, and her unwavering commitment to helping others break the cycles of abuse. Her story is a testament to the power of redemption and the resilience of the human spirit. Thank you for watching this in-depth look into the shocking case of Lorena Bobbitt, a true crime story filled with twists, pain, and ultimately, a remarkable transformation. If you found this story as captivating as we did, don't forget to subscribe to Phantom Mitchell for more true crime documentaries. We'll be diving deep into more cases that will keep you at the edge of your seat. Please like, share, and leave your thoughts in the comments below. Your support means everything. Stay tuned for more.